In this video, we're going to talk about ZAppLink. ZAppLink is found under the document window here, and what this does is it allows you to link the photo editing capabilities of an external program such as Photoshop with ZBrush for texturing and detailing. I find ZAppLink to be particularly useful for adding decals and appliques to meshes, so we're going to apply a radioactive symbol to the Wasteland Warriors mask here. So I'm going to isolate this subtool. If we go to our subtool palette, you see we actually have a variety of subtools here. And I've got this patch on the side of the head. And if I turn on solo, focus in on it, we can take a look at that. Now we're at our lowest subdivision level now. I'll step up to the highest subdivision. It's 1.3 million polygons. Now we're going to be using polypaint, so we want to make sure that we have enough geometry to support the texture resolution that we're trying to get. Now also, ZAppLink works through the ZBrush document window, so you want to make sure that when you are preparing to use ZAppLink for projection, the part that you're projecting on isn't really small, because that's going to reduce the amount of texture resolution you get. So let's try and fill the document window with the piece that we're going to texture. Now we're going to put, like I said, a radioactive symbol on here. I want this to look like sort of a battered and distressed patch that's on the side of this hood. So let's put a color on here to begin with, sort of a yellow ochreish color. We'll do RGB color fill object, just to give us a base to work with. Then I'll turn down that color, go to standard brush, spray stroke, turn the color modifier down on that, and let's grab just a broken up alpha for this brush, turn off Z add, and we're just going to put some variations in that, some sort of smudging and staining. We'll switch color, sample that base color again, turn down our RGB intensity, and just give some variation to this. Now, we have a whole chapter that's just on polypaint, where we'll go into polypainting in more detail. We also have a chapter that goes into surface noise using the surface settings here. So I could potentially also turn on noise, and if we frame the mesh here, and take the strength and set the strength to 0. And then we can use the modifier for color here. Let's add some noise to that. We can put some noise into this mesh by using this noise modifier. So let's bring this down, make this kind of there we go, get something like that, click OK, and apply to mesh. And now that's applied to the polypaint. Now perhaps we want to give it a little bit more surface detail so it's not quite so smooth. So in that case, I could go back to noise and edit it. And let's turn color blend down to 0 this time. And we'll turn the strength of the noise up, and then we'll turn the noise scale up, and we can add some variation to the surface. Let's turn that up like this. Click OK. Let's actually edit that. That's a little too noisy. Let's reset that curve. There we go. Bring our noise scale down. We still had noise on our curve, which was giving us some more noise than we wanted in the actual noise. So let's go ahead and turn this scale down. Turn the strength down. I just want to break up that surface a little bit. There we go, and we'll just apply to mesh. And we'll add one more subdivision level. Now we're ready to apply our applique to this. So I'm going to go to Document and press ZAppLink. Now this is going to say that you have to select a Photoshop compatible external editor, and it's going to ask me to browse to my Photoshop. So I'll just go to Applications, come over here, and we will go to List View, and it should be Adobe, Photoshop. There we go. So it's switching to Photoshop 2020, and now it's going to bring up the ZAppLink projection window. So the first time you run it, it will ask you which application you want to use to open with ZAppLink. Now I can turn on double-sided if I want to double-side project. So if I had the same patch on the other side, it could project through. I'll turn that off. I can turn on fade if I want to sort of fade out the edges so I don't have a really sharp edge or stretching. And here we can enable perspective if we have perspective turned on. We can also set the target application by clicking this button here. So I'm going to click drop now, and it's going to drop this to a document, and then it's going to open it in Photoshop here. So it has now opened my ZBrush document in Photoshop, and this will come in with 3 layers. There's the shading layer on top, there's the background on the bottom, and then the middle we have our RGB color with a mask associated with it. So any changes that we make, we want to make either on this layer or between the shading layer and this layer. So I will come over here where I've got the radioactive symbol. I will select this with Control A and then copy it with Control C. We'll go back to our temp ZAppLink export.psd. That's our temp file that is linked to ZBrush. I'll Control V to paste that. And you see it pastes just above this layer. I am going to scale this down. And let's position it right here. Now I'm going to add a mask to this. And I am going to go to my brushes. I'll go to the brush, and let's select something sort of a little raggedy and jagged edged, like the Matte charcoal. It's one of my custom brushes here. Let me scooch Photoshop over so we can see it. And I'm going to paint black into this, and this will just allow me to erode the edges here so it can look like it's a little bit chipped or broken up. And I'm just going to overdo this a bit. And then I'm going to switch color to white. Turn my draw size down, and then we'll bring back some of this. So it feels a little bit more like it's sort of chipped away or eroded. And this is just all the standard Photoshop tools. And this allows you to have access to this functionality inside of ZBrush, which is really great when you're texturing. And you can also create masks with this. Anything that you could do with texture or polypaint in ZBrush, this allows you to use the Photoshop tools for that same purpose. I'm just going to erode out the ends here. Don't want it to be so perfect. And I'll turn my brush size up a little bit and turn my opacity down. And I'm just going to weather this just by dragging some strokes through the mask here. And we could go in and create things like scratches. I'll use the striations brush that I have here, and I can create scratches. I'm painting black into my mask, and so we can turn up our opacity on that, and we can do some scratches like this. And I'll invert back to the color white, and then we can reintroduce some of that paint like this. And I can go back to the layer itself and Control U, and I can dial back my opacity. So I'll hit the Control U key, and let's bring that window onto this screen, and I can dial back the opacity a little bit so it's not quite so saturated. There we go. Now I'm going to right-click on the mask, and I'm going to click Apply Layer Mask. So that is now committed to that mask. Now I'm going to merge down with Control E, and there's going to be a pop-up window here that says, it has a layer mask. You want to preserve it. You absolutely must preserve this mask for it to work. So select Preserve. Now Control S to save this document. I've just saved this temp document. Now I'm going to go back to ZBrush, and it's going to ask me if I want to re-enter ZBrush. So I'm going to say re-enter. It will apply what I just painted, and I can click Pick Up Now. I'm going to turn off Fade. I don't need Fade turned on. The reason I don't need Fade is because I'm not projecting a texture around a curved surface. So I'll click Pick Up Now, and it will now apply this as polypaint. So now I have now applied that to that mesh. So let's go ahead and turn off Solo and F for focus. You see that we've now got that applique applied there. So let's grab the faceplate here. We'll zero in on the faceplate, and I will solo this. Let's fill the document with this, and then go to Document, ZAppLink. We'll drop again, and it will take us back over to Photoshop, and it will automatically ask us if we want to update. So I'll click Update, and it will update that. Now I'll come over here and grab some kind of weathered texture like this, and I will select all with Control A and then copy it with Control C. We'll come back over to our temp document, and let me close my swatches here. Bring this and dock this in this window here. I'll Control V, and that will paste it on top of the layer. And I will then, we can do Control Alt G to make a little clipping mask for that. And here you see we're able to put on this texture, just project it right onto the surface. I will go ahead and Control E, and it's going to preserve the mask because it didn't have to ask me because it was already a clipping mask. I will save with Control S, Alt Tab back to ZBrush. Now it's not registering a change, so I'm going to click Recheck, and now it sees that it's changed. So I'll re-enter ZBrush, and this is projecting around a curve. So I can turn on Fade, and I'll show you what that does. If I click Pick Up Now, it will apply that, but you see it fades it where the surface normal turns. So if I go to a side view now, you see it's fading out on the sides. So I could go back to Document, ZAppLink. Let's turn on Drop Now. And once again, it's going to ask us if we want to update. We will update. Control V, we'll just paste that again, and I will Control Alt G so I get that clipping mask. And this time I will probably erase out stuff here because I can turn this on and off and I can see where my texture is going to blend. So I don't need to project the texture here because I already got this area. And I already got this area. But I probably want to keep that, so let's undo that. It's probably best instead of erasing to actually use a mask for this. So I just click the mask button here to add a mask, and then I'm painting black into my masked area, and that allows me to show and hide regions. So if I paint black or white, it will show and hide respectively. So if we go to black, I can hide all of this. Actually, a nice way of approaching this is to just go ahead and just block out all of that. Switch to white, turn my brush size down, turn up my opacity, and then we'll start to paint the mask back in the areas where we need it. So like right here, I want to get it there and there, and I definitely want to get it here. Now I will apply this mask by right-clicking on it, click Apply Layer Mask, and then Control E to merge down, Control S to save, Alt Tab back to ZBrush, re-enter ZBrush, and I'm going to turn on double-sided because I want to project this through to the opposite side. Pick Up Now. And there we go. And if we rotate over to the other side, you'll see it has projected through. So we've projection painted that texture onto our faceplate. So ZAppLink is incredibly powerful. You can use any of the tools inside of Photoshop as texturing tools inside of ZBrush. If I were to want to create a serial number, for example, on this portion of the mask here, let's go ahead and select this. We'll do the cowl. We'll put a little serial number right here. Make sure that we have enough subdivision levels for that. Go to our geometry, and we should divide a few times. So need to make sure that nothing's hidden here. So let me Control-Shift-Click, clear any masking, and then divide. So I want to make sure that there's enough geometry to support the texture resolution that I want. And I will go ahead and let's make this sort of let's make this more of a brown base color. Like that, a warmer brown, and go to Color, Fill Object. Make sure RGB is turned all the way up, and then go to Color, Fill Object. Probably not quite so dark. Let's turn that up. Color, Fill Object. There we go. Now I will use ZAppLink once again. I will go to Document, ZAppLink, turn off double-sided, turn off fade, drop now. It'll bring us back to Photoshop automatically, and it will update. Now I'm going to use the text tool. I'll just hit T for text, and we will put a serial number in here. So we'll do 00138. 0. And then we'll select all. And then let's change the color of this text with the color picker. Give it a light gray. And let's change the font from Arial to something a little more military, like this stencil here. Now I'm going to right-click on this. Oops, right-click on that and rasterize type. Now I can Control-T to transform this, and we'll just scale this up and then rotate it over this way. And we're just going to place the serial number right here. Now I can do some interesting things with this. Let's jump up a copy with Control-J, and I'll go to Filter, Artistic, or Stylize, pardon me. Filter, Stylize, Find Edges. And what this does is it finds the edges of that. So if I Control-I to invert, you see I've got a light border or a dark border around the edges, depending on whether or not I invert it. I'll invert that, turn on the other layer, and the one where I did the Find Edges, I'll set this to Multiply. Let's zoom in on that and see if we can't get a nice sort of border on that. I'll do a little bit of blur on this. We'll go to Filter, Blur, Motion Blur. And we'll make this motion blur go straight up and down. And we'll dial back the distance on it a little bit. And we'll jump that up a couple times. Merge that down. Merge that down. Let's undo that. That looks a little too blurry. I'm going to undo that. I think I got one too many there. So Control-Z. There we go. So let's do this. Let's set this to Multiply. There we go. And we'll jump that up a couple times. And we'll turn on this layer. And let's just dial back the opacity on that so it's less opaque. There we go. Now I'll merge these together. Now, this is not an active subtool right now, so watch what happens if I take my brush, and we'll just grab any sort of random color here. We'll grab red. And I'm going to switch to a different brush here. Let's go back down to one of my brush presets. We'll use that ragged brush, and I'll drag a red brush stroke across here. So watch what happens when we come back into ZBrush. I'm going to save, Control-S, Alt-Tab back to ZBrush, re-enter ZBrush. It applies the poly painting. I'm going to pick up now, but watch what happens. The inactive subtool will not pick up that poly paint. Only my currently active subtool will get the poly painting. So that's important to note, that if you try and paint across the document, it's only going to pick up poly paint where you have an active tool. Now, ZAppLink is great for texturing. It's great for creating masks. You can just use grayscale and then go in and create a complex pattern to make a mask and then convert your poly paint to masking, which is very simple. You just go to Masking, Mask by Poly Paint. So we go to our masking menu, and we have an option down here, Mask by Color, Mask by Poly Paint, and that will mask based on our poly painting. We can use our sampling here to select. So if we zoom in here, let's mask that serial number. I'll grab this swatch here and I'll drag it over to the numbers until those are selected. There. So I'm going to turn on hide mask, or excuse me, turn on inverse mask just to make sure that I get the full number. And that is selected. So I'm going to click OK. And I'll go to Poly Paint and turn off colorize so we can actually see our masking. Let's go back to white. So there's our masking. I'll invert the mask by control-clicking on the background, and I'm just going to mask over this stroke here because I don't actually want that to be affected. So I have the serial number unmasked, so I could go into deformation and go to the inflate slider and maybe set this to -2 and hit enter, and that's a bit too much. So we'll undo that and set that inflate slider to -0.5, and that'll give us a little bit of embossing there for that texture. So we go back to Poly Paint, turn colorize back on, and now we have a sculptural element based upon our texture, our polypaint element. Now you can take the smooth brush, turn off RGB, and just do a little bit of smoothing on the ragged edges of that, and that'll clean up any noise there. With RGB turned off, it will not affect the polypainting. So that is ZAppLink. It's been around ZBrush for quite some time. A lot of people aren't aware of it if they've come to ZBrush in recent years because it hasn't gotten as much attention, but it's extremely useful, especially if you're interested in doing hard surface detailing, adding decals, appliques, working with costumes. I find it really, really useful for projection of texture source materials onto an object. Now, a lot of this has been replaced in terms of projection with Spotlight, which we talk about at length in a different video, but Spotlight doesn't allow you to use all the Photoshop painting tools. So there's definitely a place for ZAppLink, and it's definitely still a very, very powerful tool that I encourage you to explore further and potentially use in your own workflow. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next.